Welcome everyone to our webinar this afternoon. It's great to have you all join us here today, where we'll be talking about funding community impact through your chamber foundation. So before I turn it over to our speaker for today, I'd like to just give a couple of housekeeping reminders before we get started. We are expecting a large number of participants today, so we have muted everyone's audio line just to avoid any of that background noise. That does mean that during our Q&A today, if you have a question for Mark, you can feel free to put that in the chat. You can put questions in the chat throughout his presentation or during the Q&A, whichever you would prefer, and we will be reading those out so Mark can answer those questions. I'd also like to invite all of you to rename yourself in Zoom and add your chamber to your name so that other participants can know where you're from and what community you're representing. And then finally, we are recording today's sessions, and we will put that recording up on the ACCE webinar catalog on our website, so you can access that recording or send that recording to a colleague who may not have been able to join us today. So with that, I would like to introduce today's speaker. So today we are lucky to be joined by Mark Wilson, who is the president and CEO of the Florida Chamber of Commerce. Mark leads the political, lobbying, grassroots, and economic research operations of the organization, which focuses on making Florida more competitive by creating a business climate that generates prosperity and high-paying jobs. Among other leadership positions, Mark serves on the board of directors of Florida Association of Chamber Professionals, Enterprise Florida, and Leadership Florida, and serves as the national chair of the Council of State Chambers. Mark received his undergraduate degree from the University of Georgia and has earned the national designation of Certified Chamber Executive. Prior to joining the Florida Chamber, he served as vice president of the Chicagoland Chamber and previously served with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. So with that, I would like to go ahead and turn it over to Mark.
All right. Well, thank you very much, team at ACCE. And what I'd like to do, I want to share my presentation. So let's get the technology working first. Amy or Emily, can you let me know that we're good to go there?
We are good to go.
All right, fantastic. Well, again, thanks for that introduction. I so wish we could all be together in person, but it won't be long, I don't think. Again, I'm Mark. I run the Florida Chamber of Commerce. And when the team reached out and asked me if I'd participate in a conversation about foundations and chambers of commerce in the foundation business, frankly, I can learn a lot from all of you on this call, but we've had quite a bit of progress here in Florida. Our foundation has been around for 50 years, and what I want to do in the limited amount of time I have today is kind of set up what's the strategy behind what we're doing, how does it fit into securing Florida's future, how does it fit into what the Florida Chamber of Commerce stands for, what our mission is. We have a war fighting machine just like all of you do. And of course, our war is, how do we grow free enterprise? How do we grow private sector jobs? And our foundation is one way that we can advance the mission and what we believe in. And so what I hope to do today in the amount of time that we have is walk you through a little bit of what we do, why we do it. And what Amy and Emily have set up here is if all goes well, I'll quickly get through my presentation, and then we'll have plenty of time for information sharing and questions and things like that. I've said for 25 years, when you've seen one chamber, you've seen one chamber. But I will tell you, in my experience, if you don't have a 501c3 or several for that matter, you're really missing an opportunity to unite your local business community for good. And I hope that we can make the case today that it's an untapped opportunity for you to, whether it's a city, a county, a region, or a state, there's a real opportunity here to unite other foundations and philanthropic giving and philanthropic alignment. And all have failed today if I don't do a very good job making that case. So pictures are worth 1,000 words. And what you're seeing on screen there is, I don't have any idea where that's from, but I've done over 1,000 presentations throughout Florida, whether it's in person or Zoom. And we always use the Florida Chamber Foundation's data and analysis in every single thing we do. An hour ago, I was doing a statewide press conference unveiling our 2021 competitiveness agenda, which is our legislative agenda. And in there, we were using a lot of our foundation metrics about the future of Florida, everything from job creation to tax issues to workforce issues. And so I hope to make the case today that your foundation can really drive and unite your entire community, not just propel your chamber. So with that said, we're going to quickly go through this. I'm a big believer in this entire presentation will be downloadable afterwards. I'll show you how to download it. And if ACCE wants to do something with it as well, by all means, we're probably in the only industry on the planet where, if we rip off and duplicate each other's work, it actually makes America a better place and it helps chambers be stronger. So I want to learn from all of you. And if we can share something we've learned along the way, then, kind of good for everybody. You mentioned my background. I just simply wanted to say, I've had the absolute honor in my career to work at a local chamber, at the Chicagoland Chamber of Commerce for a number of years, also at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And I've been our president at the Florida Chamber since 2008. I've made every mistake that a chamber can make, and we've also had quite a bit of success. We've been on a pretty big growth curve, as some of you may know, over the last decade. We had our second best new membership year in the history of our organization last year in 2020. And I think, part of it might be what we're doing, but I think a big part of it is, as my friend in Michigan, Rich Studley, taught me, there's only one legitimate excuse for a chamber of commerce, and that excuse is leadership. And I think people invest in leaders who are willing to do what nobody else is willing to do. So I wanted to give you my background and my email address there simply to say, whether it's a local chamber, a state chamber, or the U.S. chamber, at the end of the day, we're all kind of fighting for the same thing, and that's for private sector job creation and diversity, economic diversity. So a little bit about my background, probably more than you cared to hear. I also wanted to give voice. I wish we were all in a room because I was asked for a show of hands. The first presentation I ever did to ACCE was actually, I think it was in Los Angeles. And we had a couple of really strong revenue years at the Florida Chamber. And I did a presentation. If you haven't seen it, I really encourage you to look it up because, the longer things go on, the more relevant this presentation was. And some of you may remember the old car that used to be for sale for $3,995. It was called a Yugo. And I did a presentation called, Chambers Need to Stop Selling Yugos to Billionaires. And the whole part of the presentation, and it's relevant today because part of my pitch to all of you is we are not asking for enough dollars versus what we're worth, right? So if you're literally transforming your state or your city or your county's workforce system, if you're changing the infrastructure in your region, if you're creating the talent network, the competitiveness network, if you're increasing trade, that's not worth $250 a year. That's not worth $250,000 a year. That's worth millions. And, one thing I wish that, all 7,000 plus chambers could do across the country is realize we're worth a lot more than a newspaper subscription, right? If you really think about the impact we have. And so, this is what a Yugo looks like. And this is from my 2004 presentation. When reality is, this is what our members want, right? They're willing to pay $350,000 for a machine that's better than anything else. And so part of what I want to talk about today is our mindset. And in my opinion, I've heard a lot of peers talk about, we need, to lower prices of things. And I think it's exactly the opposite of what businesses in America want. Chambers are not for everyone. Chambers are for leaders who care enough about the future of your community to invest whatever it takes to do things that only a Chamber of Commerce can do. And again, I know there's people on the call who would argue with me on that. And I'm not saying I'm right. I'm just saying at the asterisk on the bottom of the page, it's my perspective in serving 3 chambers of commerce. And it really guides this presentation today. So with that said, the only question I want you to ponder at the beginning here is, and if you've seen my presentations across the country before, I always ask this question. And the question is your chamber member driven or market driven? And member driven would be if you do surveys and you ask your members what they want your chamber to do, I would say you're going to be out of business in probably 5 years. And that's the member driven approach, right? Because members will say they want things that they're actually not willing to pay you for. Things like networking and golf outings and things like that that we spend a fortune on, but it really doesn't drive the mission of the organization. Every chamber on the call today was created to solve a problem in your community that no one business or organization could solve, right? It's the old, we can do more together than any of us can do by ourselves. And so, again, our perspective is a chamber needs to be market driven. And by market driven, I mean in the next 2 to 30 years, no matter where you are in the world, what's the most important issue or 3 or 5 going on in your community or region or state over the next 2 to 30 years that can only be solved by a business community working together through a chamber of commerce? That would be market driven. And I would submit to you that some of you have companies that would invest 100,000, 500,000, $3, $5 million in the future of your community if they believed that your chamber was the one that was organizing the effort and actually had a blueprint and a mechanism to make it happen. And so I hope our mindset in our industry can start to really realize that, who else in America is going to help drive cities, counties, regions, and states, if not chambers. Okay, this slide, here's what you're looking at here. Again, I'm going to make this presentation available later, but here's the bottom line. In Florida, huge believers in Jim Collins and the good to great principle. Some of you who have brought your board members here to visit us at the Florida Chamber know, really big believers in the flywheel and in the hedgehog. And a hedgehog simply means, what can your chamber do better than anybody else in the world, right? And here's what we do better than anybody else in Florida, right? We attract, retain, connect, and leverage champions of free enterprise who will invest in securing Florida's future. So at the end of the day, whether we're selling foundation grants or trustee memberships or sponsorships or chamber memberships or political action, whatever it might be, if you don't believe in free enterprise, you're probably not going to invest in our work. And if you don't want to help champion what needs to be championed, you're probably not going to invest in our work. And so the Florida Chamber is not for everyone. For example, if you don't believe in these things, you're probably not going to support our work. And you're probably not going to be part of us leveraging the collective muscle and intelligence and dollars of the business community. So again, a lot of what I've said so far is mindset. And if you want to have a successful foundation, the first thing to do is understand, how does your foundation fit in your strategy? And how does your strategy fit in your mindset as an organization? If you want to have a foundation just because you have a couple members who've said, hey, if you had a C3, I could probably write you some checks, that's probably not worth opening up a C3 for. But if your C3 can actually help drive the mission of your chamber, to help drive your city, county, region, or state, then we ought to be looking at, can a C3 literally change the trajectory of your community, your region, your state? Okay, so some of you have heard me present before know that, I wish that one thing we would teach at ACCE and all of our professional development across the country is how to think, talk, and act like a futurist, right? So it's my opinion that local chamber leaders know more about your local community and economy than your mayor, your county commission, or any business leader does, right? Local chambers have access to information, past, present, and future, that other people just don't have. And that's something we can all monetize, especially as it relates to a foundation or any number of C3s. So in Florida, we talk about how much things are changing, our economics, our politics, our demographics, how much they're changing. And what this sets me up for, and my team and my board, is we can talk about 2030. We know more about the future of Florida and the future of our 67 counties and our 405 cities than anybody else in Florida does. And trust me, when you're asking for millions of dollars from leading companies, or even $100 from a small business who wants to invest in the future, you build a lot of strength and a lot of credibility when you know more about the future of your city, county, region, or state than anybody else in the marketplace. So just want to encourage you to understand there's a hunger for leaders to talk about the future, to talk about the vision. You know, as I often say, Proverbs 29:18, where there's no vision, the people perish. And I think it's especially true for chambers of commerce. If you're talking about, you know, what's going on at City Hall this month or this year, or your county commission or your state legislature, there's nothing visionary about that. If you're going to do a foundation, then we need to learn how to talk about 2 to 30 years. I'm going to show you what that looks like in just a minute. So every 10 years, the Florida Chamber Foundation invests between $1.5 and $2 million in writing a new blueprint or a vision document for our entire state. We've been doing this since 1990. And the most recent edition of this is called the Florida 2030 Blueprint. And essentially, I'm not going to go through this, don't worry, but you know, the highlights of this $2 million research initiative that took us 2 years to do is that today, if Florida was a country, we would be the 17th largest economy on the planet. So put that in perspective, Florida is bigger than Saudi Arabia from an economic standpoint. And over the last 18 months, Florida's economy has grown more than the entire economy of Mississippi. So just to put that in perspective, that's the conversation our foundation's having. We have a full-time chief economist because if we're going to lead Florida and we're going to talk about 2 to 30 years, then I need to know more about it than anybody else. Here's the punchline of this slide. If we do the right 39 things over the next decade, right? Whether that's third grade reading, whether that's cutting childhood poverty in half, whether that's having the world's most capable spaceport, or whether that's the right infrastructure, or whether that's volunteerism, or whether that's the right healthcare systems. If we do the right 39 things that we've identified in this $2 million investment, Florida can grow to the 10th largest economy in the world by 2030. So again, if I'm out asking for $1 million donation from a large corporation, I'm talking with them about, look, we're going to add 4 million more people to Florida in 10 years. That's 3 million more people on our roads driving, and that's 2 million more jobs that need to be created. And by the way, we want to be bigger than Mexico's economy in 10 years. Do you want to invest in our work? Right? Think about it. Just a different way of talking about it. And I would submit to you that there's companies, and by the way, individuals, don't forget, individuals can invest millions of dollars in your foundation. They're investing in your community, which is really what today's about. And they're doing it through your foundation if we do it right. Okay. Just a quick lesson about how the Florida Chamber operates. If we were all at the Pentagon today and I were talking to you about a war mission that we have, Middle East or somewhere like that, and I said, here's what the here's what the Navy's going to do, here's what the Air Force is going to do, here's what the Marines are going to do, the Army, the Coast Guard, Space Force, et cetera. That's what you would expect. So here inside the Florida Chamber, we have 17 different companies that we operate, but there's really 3 branches of our military, our warfighting machine. And today we're going to talk only about one of them. It's our 501c3, which you see there on the left. So here's the way we operate. We have a 501c3 that over a 6-year period is going to be an $18 million organization. We do $2.5 to $3.5 million every year there in C3. We also have our regular 501c6, which does our advocacy work, grassroots work, et cetera. And then we have a whole series of political entities. I think some of you know we invested more this election cycle in Florida than the U.S. Chamber did across the whole country. We did that in 2020. We also did that in the 2018 cycle. We play to win. We play really big on the political side, but we would not be as effective on the political side if we didn't have an incredibly strong 501c3 that's talking about where should Florida go over the next 2 to 30 years. As a matter of fact, the questionnaires we use on our political side of our house actually come from the policy recommendations that our foundation has made over a 2 to 30 year period of time. Let me say this, and I know this will sound like heresy to some of us. Our legislative agenda does not come solely from what our members ask us to do. It comes about 50-50 from what our foundation recommends that Florida should do on everything from autonomous to artificial intelligence, to trade policy, to infrastructure and so forth. So anyway, if you don't have a robust political action machine, a robust chamber of commerce that's fighting on the legislative front or at City Hall, and a robust 501c3 that's all working together like a hand in glove, then that might be something over the next 2 to 5 years. That might be something you might want to explore, because this is what businesses across the country are willing to invest in. Um, Also, back in early 2000s, we realized that whether you're in Topeka or Tallahassee, there are really 6 key policy pillars that we have to focus on. These came from our foundation and they drive everything that we do. The first one is talent. So think about workforce and education. The second one's economic development and innovation. The third one is infrastructure. Think about transportation, energy, water, broadband, right? Space. The fourth one is business climate and competitiveness. Is your city the most competitive place to do business in your state or in the United States? Is your state more competitive than any other state? That's what we're talking about. The fifth one is civics and governance, right? So in Florida, we have 405 cities and 67 counties and 34 state agencies. Are they all working together? Are they running like a business would? And how engaged is the business community in civics? It's all related. And then the final one's quality of life. This is healthcare. This is the environment, and so forth. So I only say that not because you all are going to run out and use these 6 pillars, although they will work anywhere. I will tell you this. I say that to show you how we use our foundation here at the Florida Chamber. So remember the 6 pillars. Our foundation, our chamber, and our political action programs are all aligned around the 6 pillars. They're all aligned around making Florida the 10th largest economy in the world in a decade. And so this is what our 501c3 is working on right now, right? Notice no lobbying and no political action, right? We have a staff of about 10 in our foundation. That goes up and down based on what our needs are. We'll be adding quite a few people in our foundation. If anybody's looking to move to Florida over the next several years, you see that 6-pillar framework as well. We are regularly asked to testify in the legislature. And of course, we'll do that when the legislature wants us to. We regularly meet with our executive branch. Our foundation is regularly interviewed by Wall Street Journal and others when they want to know, something about the future of Florida. Keep that in mind because next is our C6, what everybody would know as just the regular old Chamber of Commerce. This is what our chamber does. And again, I'm not teaching anything that you don't already know. And then, of course, we have our political action operations that I talked about earlier, a couple of C4s and a bunch of political committees. The reason I'm sharing this with you on a presentation about foundations is I get a lot of calls from across the country from chambers who've said, hey, I know you have a really successful foundation. We want to start one here too. And it doesn't work like that. You have to actually lay out your strategy first. If in your city, county, region, or state, if you're looking to be the leader in your region, right? If you want to lead over the next 2 to 30 years, in ways that are far beyond lobbying and political. If you want to unite your business community to make sure that the right conversations are taking place with poverty and economic diversity and inclusion and infrastructure, then a foundation might be exactly the right strategy for you to put at the front end of that. And then, of course, you can do research every single time a major community issue comes up. And then you have the credibility to stand with a superintendent of schools or with your mayor or with your governor and say, hey, we've done research on this. Here's what other countries are doing. Here's what other states are doing. And here's what we think, we should do in Wyoming or what we should do in Texas or wherever it might be. Here's a little bit of sort of, money where the mouth is kind of thing. So a lot of people ask, okay, well, what are you all working on and where's it going to come from? And I don't mind sharing with this group. Over the next 6 years. So we just launched a very robust, very aggressive 6-year, $105 million strategy to secure Florida's future. And the reason I put this slide up here is to show you right there in the middle, you see the 2020 to 2025 plan. We have planned to do $18.4 million between 2020 and 2025, all out of RC3. And again, this fits like a hand in glove with the advocacy work the chamber's doing. And then, we'll recruit candidates or unelect candidates based on their support of what our foundation says needs to happen to make Florida more competitive. And again, I want to underscore, we can't do political work in our foundation. We don't do, we could do, but we don't do advocacy work out of our foundation. But our foundation is like the research and development arm of a company. Where do we need to go? What do our customers need? How do we grow our state? How do we help, over 200 local chambers of commerce in Florida find out what they need locally so they too can advance the 6 pillars and they can grow their city, they can grow their county. The only purpose of this slide, you can look it up later, is notice there are 6 pillars or 6 columns on these slides. Remember earlier I said there's 39 things that we have to do in Florida to grow to the 10th largest economy in the world. This is the executive summary of this $2 million research initiative. These are the 39 things that the business community needs to make happen over the next decade if we're going to be bigger than Mexico. All 39 of these came from our C3. They're all managed by and accounted for out of our C3. And I'm going to, before we go to questions, Emily and Amy, before we go to questions, I'm actually going to show you kind of the where, put your money where the mouth is. We have, if you're not aware of the floridascorecard.org, I'm going to show you what it looks like. And if you don't have one of these, find a way to beg, borrow, or steal and create local metrics, because it will show that your chamber is in fact that futurist that we talked about before. Our chamber is just over 100 years, our 501 old, our foundation's just over 50 years, and our political action program's just over 25 years old. But they all work together like a hand in glove. We have a long history. Every one of those research reports you're looking at has turned into game-changing legislation that has fundamentally changed the trajectory of Florida. If you go back over here to this 1994 report, No More Excuses, What Businesses Must Do to Help Improve Florida's Schools. In 1994, Florida had the 49th worst K through 12 system in America. Only Mississippi was worse, right? If you look at the Florida K through 12 system today, it's one of the best in the world. It's top 10 in the United States. And our colleges and universities, you're not going to believe me, so go look it up. For 3 years in a row, U.S. News and World Report has rated Florida's colleges and universities #1 in the United States for 3 years in a row. I can tie all of that back to our 1994 research report that recommended a blueprint of the business community has said, okay, if someone else isn't going to do it, we're going to do it. Back to that part from Rich Studley taught me from Michigan, there's only one excuse for a chamber and it's leadership. So again, these are the kinds of things we've done over time. And for all of you who have foundations, it's not a place for a golf outing. It's not a place just to put an event. It's a place to really organize your business community and do what I call philanthropic alignment, which I'm going to ask you all about in a minute. All right. So I'm going to go fast through just some samples of things that our foundation puts out, and then we're going to go straight to questions after maybe 10 more slides or so. So I mentioned Florida is going to grow by 4 million more people over the next 10 years. Thanks to the research in our foundation, we can tell you where those people are going to be, where the growth is going to be. So when companies like Amazon or Walmart, want to move distribution facilities to Florida, or we have companies in other countries like Brazil, Mexico, Chile. When they're looking at moving manufacturing and distribution, they want to know where's all the growth going to be, right? Florida's a big state, takes 12 hours to drive from one end to the other. Here are the top counties that are going to add the most people, and you can see it by numbers or by percentages. Do you know this for your state? Do you know this for the counties that you represent if you're a regional chamber? Because as soon as you can go to an ed board or as soon as you can go to a funder, if you're going to ask somebody for $250,000 to invest in the future of your community, if you don't know these numbers, then you're not giving yourself every advantage that you can. And these are the kinds of things our foundation cranks out every single day, these kind of heat maps. And again, I mentioned the floridascorecard.org. I don't bring this up because we're going to go through it. I brought it up because I want to give you examples. This became a tool that we could use to measure how's Florida doing against where we want to be in the future. One thing I want to point out, see this down here, third grade reading scores? So see this 100% that's in gray? Remember the Florida 2030 blueprint I told you about? If we're going to be the 10th largest economy in the world, there's 39 things we have to do to get there. Well, that's one of them. So you see the gray goal. We want 100% of our third graders to be able to read at grade level by 2030. And yes, it's the business community that's leading that goal. Well, right now, you see the green 58%. Right now, 58% of our third graders in Florida can read at grade level. And before all of you say that's terrible, go look up your own and notice that we're better than you, right? So if you think 58% is bad, you're right, right? The US is not in the top 20 nations in the world on this metric anymore, and chambers of commerce can change this. And so just wanted to kind of show you how that works. And this slide sets up really what I want to show you about how this works state to local. So in Florida, let me go back one. In Florida, we have 67 counties. And if we were live right now up here, right, if I were to hit this drop down box, all 67 counties would come up. And what's important about that is here's what it would look like. So Orange County, which is Orlando, right? So those of you who come in to go to Disney, you fly into the Orlando airport, you stay in Orange County. So our unemployment rate in Florida right now, 6.1%, but I can fly to Orange County and before I get there, I can tell you they have 74,701 fewer jobs in Orange County today than they had a year ago. Their unemployment rate is 7.2%. And then what I can talk about is, okay, COVID, right? So Florida has 1.73 million cases, right? But in Orange County, they have 103,000. And on an average day, they have 717.9 new cases. So our foundation is not only putting statewide data out there, but local chambers all over Florida are able to use our data, customize it. We put their name on it. So not only is our foundation helping the Florida Chamber lead Florida, we're helping 200 local chambers be the leader in their communities as well. And I think this is a secret sauce. Again, it doesn't matter what chamber it is, we're all fighting the same fight. So why not have our foundation give this data to local chambers who want to lead their communities as well? Here's another one, right? So people are leaving high tax, high regulation states right now, New York, California, Illinois, New Jersey. Sorry if you're from one of those states, but we're stealing your residents and your companies because of your taxes and your regulations. And here's the proof. Every hour, 1.19 million of W-2 income moves to Florida from your states. Every single hour, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And we also break this down by county. So if I'm the Orlando Chamber of Commerce, I'm able to go on here and I'm able to say, hey, every year, almost $200 million of income is moving into Orange County from places that you're all from. Okay. What about poverty, right? And this is the single most important initiative that we're involved in. We've said over the next 10 years, if we're going to be the 10th largest economy in the world, we have to cut childhood poverty in Florida in half. And the only way we're going to do that is to unite local chambers together and focus on this at the zip code and the county level. So again, we put our money where our mouth is and we're measuring our efficacy. And again, how many companies right now want to invest in diversity and in equity and in equality of opportunity? Well, I testified in Congress 5 years ago on this topic. The Florida Chamber Foundation was doing this before it was cool. And I hope we can all work together and agree one of the highest benefits of free enterprise is to cut childhood poverty in half. And we do that. We've been working with the Federal Reserve. We've done a lot of our own original research. We have 829,000 kids in poverty in Florida, and I'll come back to that in a second. Remember the third grade reading scores we talked about? So if we were in Orange County, I could say, look, only 55% of third graders in Orlando in their county in Orange can read at grade level. So what are we doing through the local chamber and the local business community there to partner together to make sure that 100% of our kids can read at grade level? I'm going to show you how cool this gets in just a minute, right? We also do future casting. Remember I said be the futurist? And again, this is all something, you don't have to have a foundation to do this, but I think what you'll find is individuals and companies that make C3 donations. There's a whole nother, remember the old concept we used to talk about share of wallet? If you're only getting C6 dollars or only getting political dollars, you're really missing a huge slice of the pie. And if you have a C3 that's bold enough to try to lead your community, then these are the kinds of things you're going to talk about. So again, in Florida, we need to create between 1.5 million and 2 million jobs by 2030. But in Orange County, they need to create 220,000 jobs over a 10-year period of time, right? And look, their population's going to grow, significantly over that time period. So again, all of these are tools for local chambers and local economic development organizations to use. It has the net effect of all of us generally having same goals, being on same page, all because of a foundation that's willing to share. I'm going to skip past this slide, but again, this is just in the talent pillar. Remember, there's 6 pillars. We have goals that are measured in our foundation at the state and county level on everything from 8th grade reading to 3rd grade math, even kindergarten readiness, right? So I know many of your chambers are involved in early learning. Well, what percentage of your kindergartners are ready to enter kindergarten? In Florida, it's only 53%. And by the way, we're top 5 in the country before you make fun of that number, right? So imagine if chambers could pool their resources and think about a best practices sharing through ACCE of, hey, who has the best early learning programs in the country? How do we get 100% of American kids ready for kindergarten by the kindergarten, right? Sounds like a simple concept, and you would think our education community would be focused on this, but it's obviously not working. So it's going to take chambers in the business community to do it. And I submit to you a foundation is a perfect way to do it. Here you have a state representative in Florida who also runs one of the best early learning organizations in Florida. And I want you to take note of what he said. He runs the Children's Movement of Florida, which is our early learning effort in Florida. And he essentially said they're not going to be successful unless the business community comes to the table and drives this. Again, how much is it worth to the business community to have your chamber foundation engage and be willing to talk about these tough issues? It's worth millions to your community. It's worth tens of millions to your state. And again, it's partly mindset. Remember the poverty conversation I had earlier? So in Florida, and again, I don't know your state or your city or your county, but in Florida, we have 983 zip codes. And what we have is we heat map, where do these kids live that are in poverty? Half of all the kids in poverty in Florida live in just 15% of our zip codes. So imagine when I go out and talk to leading companies in Florida and I say, hey, the Florida Chamber Foundation is working on an initiative called the Prosperity Initiative, and we want to cut childhood poverty in half in 10 years. And then 150 of our 983 zip codes is where we need to focus. Would your company like to help invest in this initiative? Right? Again, this is a $2.5 million initiative that we have. And if you're not familiar with it, I'd be happy to talk offline with anybody who wants to know more. This is zip code level prosperity. We did a major report on this. We worked with I mentioned the Federal Reserve. And what we found is it doesn't matter where you are, Birmingham, Los Angeles, Seattle, it doesn't matter. There are 10 root causes of poverty that these will send you into poverty and these will keep you from getting out of poverty. And I submit to you that chambers of commerce through your foundation are uniquely positioned to address each of these 10 issues. And so, here's a new graphic that we came up with. And in all 983 zip codes, you can see 1 through 10 here. We're actually finding local businesses and local associations from United Way to Boys and Girls Club to the college to, Disney, Publix, IBM, you name it. Businesses are stepping up saying, in my zip code where I live or in my zip code where my company is, we want to help solve all 10 of these issues. Who better than a local chamber to organize this at the local level? So if you're interested in zip code level reform or our 10 root causes, again, I'm showing you these as examples because these are all out of our 501c3. And these are things that really can get funded through your C3. And then finally, here's Broward County. So think Fort Lauderdale for those of you who aren't familiar with Florida. And you could go online to the Florida Gap Map right now, and you could look at every zip code in Broward County. And as you mouse over it, and again, this is just an illustration of what we have, we're not live, each zip code will tell you how many kids in that zip code are living in poverty, right? So you go meet with a company that you have in your area and you ask them to invest in your foundation and you say, hey, give me the zip code where you live and give me the zip code where your office is. And in real time, you can say, Hey, did you know there's 3,207 kids in poverty where you live? And by the way, at the office, there's another 4,022. Nobody knows this information, and you'd be shocked what happens when CEOs learn it. They want to know what can they do, and they want to know what's your chamber doing. Again, these are all the things that we've discovered in our foundation. I mentioned the Florida Gap map. Every dot on this map is a school with a third grade classroom. So right now today, you can go to the floridagapmap.org. You can click on Broward County. You can mouse over any of these schools. And here's an example I gave you. This particular school, only 36% of the kids can read at grade level, which means in that school, 96 kids cannot read at grade level. Let me tell you what happens when chamber board members and business leaders in your community see that number. They want to know what they can do about it. And if you have a foundation that wants 100% of your kids to read at grade level by 2030, then all of a sudden the business community is back to investing in your chamber's efforts to make your community a better community, right? So I'm going to end there. And here's a fundamental question that I would ask everybody. Philanthropic alignment. If your chamber hasn't spent a lot of time on this, I would ask you to start here. Here's what philanthropic alignment means to us. You have individuals in your city, county, region, or state that are already investing thousands or millions, some case billions, but mostly hundreds of thousands or millions into 501c3 work, into other foundations, right? Most of those companies that have foundations or individuals, they have goals. Maybe it's food, maybe it's education, maybe it's getting technology in the hands of kids who can't afford it. Maybe it's the environment. Well, if those are all the things that your chamber is concerned about, and if you position your 501c3 as the group that's unifying the business community's charitable contributions and investments in C3, then what you're actually doing is providing a return on investment for all of those other investments. So if someone's investing in the United Way, in Feeding America, and in Boys and Girls Club, but the local chamber has a scorecard that says, here's what our community goals are between now and 2030. And here are the nonprofits that are working with us to help make our community reach its potential. What you're actually doing is helping other nonprofits help you. And by default, you become the leader in the community. This is one way that we've been able to be the leader in the community. So with that said, also, one other thing we've done, we've put most of our events that we do statewide, we've moved them strategically into our 501c3 because most of our events are not really one-day events. They're actually part of a 365-day movement that we have, whether it's early learning, whether it's space, whether it's technology and innovation, whether it's economic outlook and diversification. These are all year long programs that we have. And by the way, our lead sponsorships for 2021 are already sold out because, again, this is something that we do out of our foundation all year. These aren't just one day events, so to speak. So with that said, that's how you can download it. And if we have time, Emily and Amy, happy to, answer questions or, take incoming or do whatever you would want to do.
Great. Thank you so much, Mark. And I'll encourage folks who are on the line to go ahead and drop any additional questions you might have into the chat here. But we do have a few questions that have come in during your presentation, Mark, and a couple of them are related, sort of investment question related. So the first one is, do you get other smaller chambers to invest in this work?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So about a little over a year ago, we recruited, some of you may know Katie Yater. She's number 2 here at the Florida Chamber. She's our chief operating officer and chief financial officer. And one of the strategies that we've really started to employ, and I give her all the credit for it, is, we have over 200 local chambers that we work with in Florida, and I think we have great relationships with most. Some local chambers in Florida do, in fact, invest in our work, not just in our chamber, but in our foundation work. In fact, we had one just the other day want to invest in a new COVID impact study that we're working on. But what I would say to that question is, I'm such a big believer that local chambers, right, if armed with the right information about the future of their city, county, and region, right, local chambers are like part of our army. And every local chamber, they want third graders to read at grade level. They want to cut childhood poverty in half. They want great infrastructure. They want a great tax climate. What we haven't had in this country is a way for all of us to be on the same page with local and regional goals that tie to state goals. And so, um, yes, we have local chambers that serve on our various boards. We have monthly meeting with every local chamber in Florida that wants to participate. And the way we view it is, if a local chamber never wrote us a check, that's perfectly fine. I sort of view it as my responsibility as president of the Florida Chamber of Commerce and the Florida Chamber Foundation is I don't think I would be a good steward of our members' investments if I wasn't making all of these tools available for free for local chambers to be the leader and futurist in their community. And again, I have to give all the credit to Katie Yater. We've fundamentally started changing the way we're doing business here over the last year. And I view it as a service to be able to have our friends and partners at local chambers. If we can make the local chamber, if we can position a local chamber as having more information about the future of their city and county than their mayor and county commission, then we're positioning the business community ahead of everybody else, not better than anybody else, but information on economic diversity and childhood poverty and what are the best practices that are working on third grade reading and economic development. And that's what chambers of commerce can do that nobody else in the world can do. So I hope that helps. And I think the real economic drivers of our work are the companies that stand to benefit from 4 million more people living in Florida. And no offense to those of you who are in New York, Illinois, and California, but part of our focus is to make sure we don't do what you've done over the last 20 years. And that's a real rallying cry. We've had billionaires move here from each of your states who want to invest in the Florida Chamber Foundation's work we have an initiative here called Let's Keep Florida Florida. And it's specifically aimed at not becoming like Greece, France, or California, Illinois, or New York. And, so that's part of our narrative. It's part of our story.
Great, thanks, Mark. And I have a couple of follow-up questions. So I'm going to combine two questions for the next one. There's a question around when you fund your foundation activities, is that funding primarily coming from members, corporations, corporate foundations, other C3s? And specifically, when you go to a corporation or a company for investment, are you going to them focused on the foundation or the chamber, or are you approaching folks and asking them to invest in both?
Amy, that's an awesome question. And the answer is all of the above. I think we have to be nimble enough and realize our business model is we need millions of investments in our C3, our C6, our C4s, and our political committees. And internally, I have to set the tone from the top that, an investment in our foundation is just as important as an investment in our chamber. And so I'll say it to you this way. Just last week, I met with a CEO of a hospital, and we were trying to sell that hospital a $100,000 membership in the chamber, thinking we might get a $25,000 investment. So when we sat down and met, he said, look, I don't want to be part of the chamber. I want to be a $50,000 member of the foundation. I'm much more interested in your childhood poverty and your healthcare work on the 2 to 30 year side. And so, would it be okay with you, Mark, if I was a $50,000 investor in the foundation work that you do? Right. So we all have to be nimble enough. One thing we did is we created one revenue team at the Florida Chamber. So everybody from our C3 team, our C6 team, and our political team is actually, obviously, we're all separated legally by C3, C6, C4, and we follow all the rules and make sure we dot all the I's and cross the T's. But we make sure that when we're talking about a company, if we're going to go ask for $3 million from a company, we go in with a plan, right? Of how much of that could be political, how much of it could be C3, how much of it could be changer, knowing that, it's only a plan until the company tells us what they want to do. right? And then that's when we have to be nimble and plug them into the right part of our organization where what they're, again, it's back to that philanthropic alignment again. What does that company want? And where do we have with our 22 revenue line items across our three businesses? Where can we best plug that company in? As you all know, sometimes companies have C3 dollars to spend. Sometimes they have political dollars to spend. Sometimes they have money left in their, in their budget where they could pay or invest in your C6. So it's very situation specific. And what I would say is have a strategy, have a plan, and realize that that plan changes when you're sitting across the desk from the CEO who says, "Oh, now that I know, Amy, now that I know what you're talking about, we want to do $27,000 and we'd like it to go to your foundation, to help out with this work over here." It really becomes a lesson in marketing and a lesson in being nimble. And, you know, um, I think that's the new business that we all have to be in, is let our members decide where they want to make their investments and then leverage that.
Great. I have some questions here around strategic alignment. And the first one is asking about the alignment of your C3 strategic plan and your C6 strategic plan. Sort of what's the relationship between those two? Is the C3 more programmatic focus, or sort of how do you handle both of those together?
Yeah, it's an awesome question. So, if you were all at the Florida Chamber today, I would take you out front. The sign on the front of our building says the Florida Chamber of Commerce, and our tagline, our purpose is securing Florida's future. And that's the purpose of all 17 of our companies, certainly the three divisions that we have. So here's the way, Amy, we look at that. If it's 2 to 30 years, it's our foundation. So ask me, okay, Mark, you said 58% of your third graders can read at grade level. You want it to be 100% by 2030. How are you going to do that? Well, that would mean our foundation is actually working on that. And our foundation could share with you, here's all the ways that we're working on in Florida to get that done. Now then, we would then turn to our C6 and say to our 34 lobbyists, I would say, hey, our foundation says, here's three things that need to happen this year. Maybe we have a quality early learning bill, and maybe we have a school choice initiative, and maybe we have, three other bills that are K-12 related. They then make it on our legislative agenda. So in the short term, 0 to 2 years, that would be our Chamber of Commerce. That would be our C6. And then our political team takes the results of how politicians voted on the business community's priorities. And that's how we decide who needs to be unelected and who needs to be reelected. And so I guess the best way I can say it is think of it as a manufacturing assembly line, right? You've got, research and development going on, then you've got production going on, and then you actually have quality control at the end of the line. Well, our political process is our quality control. The manufacturing process is the lobbying piece. The research and development on the front end that decides what we're going to make and how it needs to be made and out of what, that's really the research and development end. That's our 501c3. So the message I would want to send is obviously between IRS and elections, friends, we have to keep, the operations of these very separate. But the 6 pillars that I talked about before, the 2030 goal, how do we grow Florida to the 10th largest economy in the world? All of our entities share that goal. The issue is, okay, well, what does the foundation do versus the lobbying side versus the political side? They all work on the 39 goals. They all work on the 6 pillars, and they all work on unifying the business community to try to make sure the right things happen. So I hope that makes sense. It's really about our model and how it all works together. It's like a 3-legged stool. If you pull one of these legs out, the other 2 fall on their face.
Great. I think that actually addresses several of the questions that have come in. So I'm going to shift gears with the couple of minutes that we have left. You got some nice appreciation for the scorecard in the comments as you were speaking to it. And then there's a follow-up question that was just asking a little bit about how you gather that data. Would you potentially be willing to share any of those surveys? Do you have data evaluation in-house? Are you contracting that out? What does that model look like for you all?
Yeah, of course. Anything we have, I would want to share with, brothers and sisters in the chamber business for sure. And I'm also the chair of our National Association of State Chambers. And so as every state chamber in America knows, we're an open book. If we've got something, we want to share it, because like my friend Chris at the Washington Chamber, they take what we have, they make it better, and then we steal it back. And that's kind of how I think we can all operate. But for the most part, on the floridascorecard.org, there are hundreds of metrics. Some of them are our own original research and data. Most of them are data points that we go out and gather every month, every quarter, or every year from other sources. And what we've essentially done is we've essentially aggregated data and put it all in one place. It gets updated monthly, both at the state level as well as the county level. And that's something nobody else is doing. For the most part, we do it internally. We do contract some of the work out, but it's really a lot more, on the graphic side and things like that. We're in the process of bringing all of this in-house. By mid 2022, most all of this will be in-house.
Great, thank you. And then we have a question.
And Amy, just one point about that, and I know we're out of time. Most people look at this and say, oh, it's Florida, it's a huge state, 22 million people, and they've got this $105 million plan. We could never do that in our city or our state. Throw that notion out the window right now. Your communications director can find most of this data. It's publicly available. And if you're willing to be the only one in your community to talk about 2030 or 2025, what you'll find is a long line of people. Um, Amy, in 2010, in April of 2010, I gave a presentation that's very similar to the one that I gave today about the future of Florida. It was in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and I had a line of CEOs. One of the people that stood in line to talk to me was a guy named Wayne Huizinga. Look him up if you've never heard of him, okay? He stood in line to talk to me, and he said, hey, buddy, he said, I don't know if you know who I am. Okay, by the way, he founded Waste Management, Auto Nation, and Blockbuster Video. He owned the Miami Dolphins, the Miami Marlins. That's just a little bit. He's one of the greatest entrepreneurs to ever walk the face of the earth. He stood in line to talk to me, and he said, hey, buddy, this is awesome. I'm going to find a way to help you. That was April of 2010. I flew back to my office. The very next morning, we had a package arrive via FedEx, and it was a check for $1 million made out to the Florida Chamber Foundation. Okay, I didn't ask for it, but an entrepreneur who knew we were on the right track without being asked overnighted us $1 million. That's the kind of thing that happens when chambers have the courage to be the only one in the room to say it like it is and to provide that leadership and talk about the future. So, Amy, it doesn't cost as much as you think to talk about the future. And as soon as you start talking about the future, you get a long line of people who want to help invest in the only person in the community who's bold enough, not to get caught up in short-term politics, but, as we say it, put the long term ahead of the short term. That's where the money is, and that's where the change can happen.
Well, I think that that's an excellent note for us to wrap up on. So, Mark, thank you so much for sharing your insights and some of the ways that you approach this at the Florida Chamber. Really appreciate your time today. I just wanted to reiterate with everyone that we are recording today. We'll post this recording and the slides so you have access to that. And then I also just wanted to mention that next week we have another session on chamber foundations, and that one's about strategic planning for your foundation. So if you're interested in continuing to learn about this topic, you have another opportunity next week, and you can go to ACCE's website to sign up for that webinar. So with that, I'll thank you all for your time and have a great rest of your afternoon.